Thanks so much for joining us today. We have the esteemed pleasure of being able to hear from local officials, and we're really excited that they get to tell the stories of what they're doing in their communities. So we all know we're experiencing the same pandemic, that COVID has changed the way that we think about broadband access, about the importance of adoption, and also about the shared responsibility of how we need to rethink that strategy across the nation. So we're excited to be able to hear not only directly from local officials, but Corian Zacher, our policy counsel who manages our local and state initiatives, will be guiding us through this conversation. And I'll tell you just a little bit about NCC before we get started, that my name is Francella Ochillo. I am the executive director of NCC, and we are a coalition of municipalities across the nation, all the way from Hawaii to Maine, with local officials who care about extending connectivity for every resident in every single community. And so when we get opportunities like this, our job is to create a platform and to create space for them to tell their own stories. So I will turn it over to Corian to get us started.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. As Francella mentioned, I'm Corian Zacher, Policy Counsel at Next Century Cities. I have the privilege of meeting with local officials from across the country to learn about the exciting new ways that they're harnessing technology to improve their residents' lives. And today, I'm so thrilled to introduce 3 local officials who are leading those efforts in their communities. We have Ricky Santiago from Louisville, Kentucky, Candelaria Mendoza from San Antonio, Texas, and Zach Friend from Santa Cruz, California. And if we could just start by each of you introducing yourself and your name, your title, and then a favorite fun fact about the city that you represent. And we'll start with Ricky, and then Candelaria, and then Zach.
Well, hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Ricky Santiago. I'm the Digital Inclusion Manager for the Office for Civic Innovation in Louisville, Kentucky. And a fun fact about Louisville, I don't know if you guys have heard, but we host the Kentucky Derby.
Hello, thanks again for having me. My name is Candelaria Mendoza, and I am one of 2 Smart City coordinators at the Office of Innovation for the City of San Antonio. So I help lead a lot of our conversations around digital inclusion. And a fun fact about San Antonio, we actually do have quite a bit of events. We're a very tourism city, so we do fiesta, and this year, actually due to COVID, it got canceled. So there's a lot of anticipation and hope that that could come back to us next year.
And thanks for having me on. My name is Zach Friend. I'm a Santa Cruz County Supervisor in California, just outside of the Silicon Valley, but on the beautiful coastal side. Little fun fact about us, other than the fact that you can't afford a house here, most likely, unless you're working in the Silicon Valley, is I represent a district that's best known for a cement ship, this is true, that was towed in 100 years ago when it went defunct, that's now totally broken down and is only a few blocks from my house, but 3 million people a year come down to the beach to look at the broken down cement ship, and I'm darn proud to represent a district with a broken cement ship. Now, we got a lot of other great things, but I just wanted you to know that you're welcome to come to our community and enjoy a mostly broken cement ship in the Pacific Ocean of Monterey Bay.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing those things in each of your communities once everything improves. So we know that each community faces its own challenges and comes up with its own unique solutions to ensuring that everyone has high quality, affordable broadband access and technologies that make their lives better. But we also know that COVID has brought many challenges. So how has that impacted your community, and how are you working to address it?
So COVID has really thrown digital inclusion and the digital divide into the spotlight. Overnight, we had roughly 30,000 students with no connection. So the Jefferson County public school systems really stepped up and provided a stopgap measure of providing Chromebooks and hotspots, as well as other community partners providing what they call non-traditional instruction labs, where even if kids did not get access to hotspots, they can go to these labs and have access to internet and help with their schoolwork. So our community has really rallied around the COVID-19, and we're still working An analogy that I use a lot is the 3 R's of disaster, natural disasters is rescue, recovery, and rebuild. I believe right now we're on rebuild, and we're working on creating digital inclusion coalition, because we know that the digital divide is not going to go away after COVID, and we can't roll back the things that we have worked so hard to keep our students and our families connected.
Yeah, I mean, similar sentiment. Here in San Antonio, we have about 1.5 million population, but we also serve 15 different school districts. So if you can imagine, when COVID hit and everybody got pushed into a virtual space, there was definitely that piece that if you didn't have your aha moment when it came to the digital divide, it definitely happened during COVID. So yeah, a lot of the similar things that Ricky mentioned, there was a galvanization of trying to get students laptops and internet and getting them connected, even if it was in the kind of a short-term strategy. So there was definitely a lot of support on that front to get people what they needed. But we also worked within the city and our office to submit a proposal as part of our CARES Act Relief Fund, the Recovery and Resiliency Plan, to set something up for a little bit more of a sustainability. We wanted to future-proof that connection and make sure that we never had this situation again, if we could be successful in doing this. So we submitted a proposal to our city council for them to consider, and we embedded equity within it, a $27 million project that basically in its essence is to leverage current assets of the city, current assets of the school districts, and other partners to connect up to 20,000 students in 50 priority neighborhoods. So again, San Antonio is very segregated, economically segregated, and always kind of finds itself on the list of most disconnected. So we definitely wanted to have a conversation around equity. So we use data to basically identify those 50 high priority neighborhoods. So we're basically trying to mimic that experience that students would have as if they were logging into a computer, their internet from their campus. So they'd be able to toggle if they were a certain school district, they'd be able to see their school's network, click on it, log in, and they're going to have a similar experience as if they were on campus, but it's going to be from their home. So that's what we're building towards right now. We're in the pilot phase of that project. So we're really excited about being able to have something more sustainable for them, more long-term.
And Zach, before you get started, I just want to interject with one thing, because as Candelaria and Ricky are talking about the impact on students, one thing I want to make sure that we elicit is that this is a problem that affects everybody. And I just want to make sure that we're framing that a lot of the people who are working on digital inclusion are also worried about seniors and, you know, lots of other vulnerable population, people with disabilities, people that are just hard to reach. So if you could even expand on things that you guys might be dealing with in California.
Well, well, thank you for that. I mean, I got to say my colleagues have really hit some very important points here. I mean, in California, we've just had a series, well, it's not done yet, but of devastating wildfires. And in our community, it was the largest set of fires that we've experienced. And talk about highlighting the challenges of not having resiliency, talk about highlighting the challenges of not really necessarily having a state or federal process that can protect you. So I think the main takeaway for people watching this should be, you're really reliant on your own. Your own community needs to develop its own structure of resiliency, of redundancy, and equity without an expectation or hope, even though there's been innovation at the state and federal level, and California's tried to lead the way on that, any of that will happen. So in our community, for example, we've had a lot of I mean, we lost 1,000 homes, and they were students, they were seniors, and they're in a situation where they need telehealth right now. They're in a situation where they obviously need to get access to school, and none of that is possible. And we've been trying to backtrack on resiliency and redundancy, and that's the challenge. Working with internet service providers and cell providers to set up towers. That's a very difficult thing to do during a time of a disaster. So pre-planning for that, the experience that we're going through is going to be something everybody in the country in the Southeast is going through with the hurricanes and other places across the country. How do you at a local level pre-plan for it? I think one of the great suggestions was using CARES Act funding that was mentioned a minute ago. We've done that for hotspots, specifically for seniors, specifically to allow them for telemedicine. But again, it's weeks after the disaster had already happened by the time we were able to purchase that and get that up, and that intervening time is problematic. So the time to plan is now for these kinds of things, and don't rely on state or federal government in order to do it. If it means, as I know that these other communities, Louisville and San Antonio, have done this, passing local ordinances to make it exceptionally easy to allow for broadband expansion or cell expansion for opportunities like that. There are model ordinances out there that you can streamline the process to help expedite this even before a time of emergency, and also reduce the costs for not just yourself, but for the carriers to do exactly that, to try and incent them to come in. We have a role at the local government level to set the stage to do that. We also have an advocacy responsibility at the state and federal government as well.
Thank you so much. I love hearing about all the creativity and flexibility that's gone on in your communities. It sounds like you've all had some similar challenges, but you've all also addressed them in different ways. So Ricky, in terms of your work, how has data impacted your work? And I know that you've worked with the need to collect more accurate data. Can you describe successful data collection methods that have allowed your community to serve unserved and underserved populations?
So as far as data collection, it's been an interesting journey. A lot of credit goes to Michael Schnerla, which was Louisville Metro's data officer, and Ed Blaney, which was the previous digital inclusion manager before I took on this role. As far as finding what data sets could we map and provide a geographical visualization of the data so we can pinpoint exactly where we needed to have our initiatives as far as digital inclusion. And we found that a combination of FCC data as far as broadband and ACS data, American Community Survey data, really provided us with good enough visualizations that we could target specific neighborhoods. On top of that, we've layered that data on top of council districts, community assets that are out there, and other different layers at schools, so that we can create a digital inclusion ecosystem at a granular level. Building with community partners as well, nonprofit organizations. For cities that are struggling to understand the data as far as the digital divide, I would echo what the National Digital Inclusion Alliance says is follow poverty, concentrated poverty. But then the other thing I would add is follow history, follow redlining, follow all the racial segregative policies that are affecting your community still now. Those are the scars of history. Follow that, and you will find the digital divide in your city.
It's great. It sounds like you've done some really amazing work there, and that's really informed your plans for expanding your programming and connecting everyone in your community. And we also know that that's not possible without resources. And you've all touched a little bit on how CARES Act funding has impacted your work. Candelaria, could you talk a little bit about what other resources communities need? And also, we know that the city of San Antonio passed a COVID community recovery plan. And could you talk about how your community is leveraging that to make a big impact on the challenges that COVID has brought?
Yeah, definitely. So I I think it gave us, the city, an opportunity to kind of reset because COVID was hitting those most vulnerable the hardest. So we definitely had some guiding principles that we wanted to embed into that recovery and resiliency plan. So equity, workforce development, small business, resilience, and well-being were all kind of wrapped in and needed to be packaged into the proposals. One of the things that we did, we have a neighborhood and housing services department, and so rental assistance is something that we do through the city. And the great thing, because of all the information that we had been doing some digital inclusion work. We actually did a local digital inclusion survey right before COVID hit. So we actually had identified where within the city our most disconnected were based on some pretty recent data that we had before COVID hit us. So we were able to kind of use that and present it along with the digital equity atlas map that the city's Office of Equity put together to kind of identify where our most vulnerable communities were and what we needed to provide them to kind of get through this pandemic. So we were able to add internet as a rental assistant utility that we'd be able to pay for. So that was great because it wasn't just about paying their electricity bill and their water bill. It was also the potential to pay for their internet bill. So if they got accepted into the program, that could be something that they could submit to have the city pay for them during this time. And of course, with the proposal, we've also been able to build on our coalition. We do have a Digital Inclusion Alliance of San Antonio, but we basically created a digital inclusion task force that we decided it was going to be a great opportunity to just be able to act quickly. What are your challenges? What can we do together to figure some of this stuff out as libraries closed, as community centers closed? People were getting laid off. Where are they going to go fill out their applications? So it was about galvanizing and getting that communication out to our end users. And there's a door-to-door campaign that's actually included in the project as well, so that we can go through and reach out to those communities that are affected more by COVID and letting them know about the resources the city has available to them, as well as other entities. So collaboration is super, super important, and it's been very, very important for us to have a space to connect with other entities and share that information because, again, we want to be able to replicate that message. The more redundant we can be with communications and with what's happening, the better. So if you're hearing it for the third time because you went to a different agency, the better that it is, it'll stick and that you'll know what's happening. So, our food bank has stepped up tremendously. As far as what we need additional, I think it's just that we're working towards a digital equity plan. That was going to be our next plan after we did our next phase after we did the survey. So we're still having conversations about building that because everybody kind of wants to know, how are we working together to get to that place that we want to be, which is that everybody has access to an affordable broadband internet. So we're having those conversations now, and we're asking people to step up. And then advocacy, we still, Texas, we have language that makes it really difficult for us to provide broadband internet to all of our residents. And that's why we focus specifically on students only for our proposal. So it's very legally challenging to do so. So that's going to be another piece of how do we work together, not only as a city, but maybe collaborating with Austin and Houston and Dallas. So we have a regional message to our state to say this is not something we can continue to ignore anymore.
Thank you so much for sharing those challenges. And it's wonderful to hear about all those amazing collaborations. Zach, I have a question for you. On top of all of the challenges that COVID imposes, we also know that California is facing devastating wildfires. Could you talk about how Santa Cruz has responded to the challenges and what recommendations you have for other cities as they prepare their networks for resiliency?
Yeah, thank you for asking. The wildfires really, not just in our state, Colorado and others, but the entire West has been facing remarkable challenges. And not only does it displace people, but it also burns down the infrastructure. And as was noted, some of my colleagues said, I mean, these are life safety issues that we're dealing with. And I think that one of the first steps has actually been ensuring that the overall community understands that it's as important or as valuable as other services that are provided, be it water or a road or other infrastructure. And so just simply talking about it with equity that way and putting it on par with the other elements has helped actually elevate the discussion, because normally, even when you start on the cleanup or you start on the rebuild process, this may be viewed as ancillary or discussed as ancillary, but you actually need to discuss it equally in how you're discussing the rebuild. On the side, though, we've been working with internet service providers as well as cell providers on having temporary networks put up. One of the things that I'd mentioned earlier is that you need to have a structure in place in advance, so don't wait for a disaster to happen for this, to make it very easy for these to be sited in your community, wherever it may be, either on state facilities because there's a state law that allows it to be co-located there, or on county or city facilities because you have a local ordinance, or on any other public right-of-way or other facility. This generally takes local action to happen. We had already done that. And I think that all communities that are watching this need to think about, does your local community have ordinances that make it easy to expand these services we're talking about? Because there isn't an incentive on the private sector to provide additional service into low-income communities. And we can be honest about it, right? They're not going out of their way to serve rural communities. They're not going out of their way to serve poor communities. They're just trying to make as much money as possible. So at least from the local government side, we had to make it so easy for them to come in. There was some pushback from the community that thought it was actually too easy what we were doing, but we had to try and equalize it, especially for investment in our rural and lower income communities within our area. Because we had that in place, actually, we've been able to already start to do some of the rebuild faster than we would have otherwise, which has been helpful on these elements, both for temporary facilities as well as the already rebuild of some of the permanent facilities. But our wildfires are not unique to us. I mean, there's natural disasters occurring across this country. And I think that our responsibility as local government officials, or those that work in government in general, is to set that roadmap to make it really easy for this deployment to happen, to define what speeds really mean access and covered, because the speeds that we currently have federally are a joke. So if that's not going to work federally, make your state change the language on that. If it's not going to work in the state, do something locally to make it so easy for this to be deployed that it really makes it, it's hard for people to not come in and do it. That's what we've been working to do in our community. And I know that Louisville and San Antonio have led on these exact same efforts, but that's how it's gonna happen, I think, from the local level on up.
In this last 6 minutes, I'm really excited to learn so many things from the comments that some of you guys have made, and even some of the things that I feel like will even stick with us after these conversations, when we're thinking about, even like Ricky's conversation about when we're thinking about the digital divide, follow poverty, because that's something that we're always trying to connect the dots between. It's the people who are already fighting housing insecurity, food insecurity, that are dealing with, can I pay my broadband bill or can I pay my car insurance this month, and having to make really hard decisions. Something also that stuck with me, that Candelaria brought up in San Antonio, about this just being about like good old fashioned like galvanizing, and if we need to actually have a regional message to actually take on the state, because we often find that sometimes there are state obstacles to connectivity solutions, whether intentional or unintentional, that end up standing as a hurdle. And something that you've mentioned, Zach, that I'm thinking about, that I didn't really think about that angle, is when we're talking about having a state standard for what it means to be accurate and covered. Like, even thinking about that angle is something that's not coming up. And very often, these are the bits and pieces that are important for us to be able to elevate in federal and state conversations, because they're authentic and they're coming from you guys who are on the front lines. So as you're thinking about this past 5 months, 6 months, after everybody at least was in the throes of the pandemic, even though it took a little while to get to some cities more so than others, when you're thinking about the stories that stick with you, that motivate you, that keep you going on the days that you are out of resources and low on energy, what's that story? And so we have 2 minutes, just shy of 2 minutes for each of you, but I want to make sure that we get the thing that you guys that like take with you wherever you go in your suitcase, that thing that keeps you motivated working on this. So we'll start with Ricky to share your story.
So for me, I'm already very passionate about digital inclusion. I do believe that digital inclusion is the one thing we can actually measure uh, beyond bias training, to erase the racial gap, right? But I think something that keeps me motivated is one, when there's new discovery, that I get to work with partners that never otherwise I would have been able to work with. For example, NAMI, Louisville, they're healthcare providers. I'm working on a project with Gathering Strength, which is providing technical assistance, internet, and computers for patients of spinal cord injuries, paraplegics and quadriplegics. And when these new partners get the computers and get the internet to their clients, their story gathering is just, it's amazing. It's what we work for. And every time we can put a computer and connect a new household, it's a new line in my battery.
Candelaria?
Yeah, I mean, for me, what keeps me motivated is that, I mean, I really do believe that efforts in digital inclusion are efforts on social justice, that there's so many connections to opportunity. And that was one of the findings that we found in our survey. So many of our respondents went out of their way to go to the library or to go to a third place to get the internet. They definitely understand that they need the internet for job seeking, for workforce development, to learn about something, to connect with their families. I think that relevance piece is really important, because I know in data previously it showed a lack there of understanding why it was important for them. But I do feel like those dots are being connected now, and people understand the importance of having the internet. It's no longer a luxury, it's a necessity that's required for daily activities. So that's what keeps me motivated, being able to work with other entities, connecting the dots on education, workforce development, health, economic development, and really, if we get to this place of allowing everybody access to the internet, everybody is going to benefit from it. Our economy should improve. Our futures should all be better, because we're offering everybody the same playing field. So that's what keeps me motivated, and knowing that that's a very, very important piece to improving social justice in San Antonio and across the state and then across the country.
Zach?
And you may have seen what became a pretty famous photo of two little girls sitting outside a fast food restaurant in order to get Wi-Fi. That happened right here in my region, actually. And the juxtaposition couldn't be stronger. We sit in the shadow of the Silicon Valley, the greatest technological and economic engine generator of the history of time, and yet we can't even provide high-speed internet or Wi-Fi to anybody within our community for any kind of decent price. And to Ricky's point earlier, let's remember that these historic inequities persist into today in a way that really should be motivating, because the incentives for the private companies to expand coverage diminish as it becomes more rural and harder to cover. Well, why do people live in a number of these communities out here? Because of the way that affordable housing is done. Or maybe that there is poor infrastructure within the lower income areas in a community, which makes it harder to build that infrastructure. Well, why is that historically done? Because of redlining. So we have to recognize that we have a responsibility in local government to equalize some of these issues. And we also have the power to do it. I mean, that's the thing that we have to recognize, that we can set that stage. Coverage, the second part of this is that coverage and capacity are different things. You will be told by internet service providers and wireless providers and cell providers that, well, it shows that they're covered on the map. But you know what? They don't even have enough data to be able to upload a homework assignment or do telehealth. They really aren't. So you need to set what those standards are. Ideally, at a federal level, we can advocate together. But if nothing else, at a state level, because states can speak up to the federal level, to create that expectation for these service providers so that equity can happen. And you know what else? It can happen quickly. This infrastructure can go up a lot faster than building new highways or bridges or a lot of other infrastructure. You can lay fiber and do a lot of stuff to communities very, very quickly if we, on the permitting side at the local level, make it easier for them and just keep that advocacy up.
Thank you so much. I love hearing what motivates you all. It's great to see the amazing work that you're doing, even in the face of everything that's going on in the world. So thank you so much for taking the time to share that with us today. And we look forward to seeing everything that you do in the future.
Thanks again, everybody, and thank you for everyone for joining this conference. For more information, please stop by the NCC website. We will post any references to materials that came up today, and enjoy the conference.